Welcome back to our afternoon session. Uh, the last the last presentation will be from Shinnakrit TANGSIRIWATTANAKUL from Ohio State University and uh, Buragohain from the University of English and Foreign Languages University Hyderabad. And today they will talk about the comparative study of two versions of the Sino Baiyi manual translation and its implications to a more precise phonological stream. And please give Shinnakrit welcome.
Good day, everyone. So, as I and my co-researcher has been introduced, I won't repeat my name and the name of my research. So today I'll be presenting our current work in progress. For today's outline, I'll start the presentation by briefly defining what we mean by tiny language, and then we'll move to some other parts like current progress in tiny phonological development, research questions and findings, phonology of Tiny in the late 16th century, our previous work from a couple of years ago, and our current and the highlight of today, the new evidence from the 17th century version of the Sino Baiyi annual translations, and we will end with conclusion and discussion. First of all, we define the Tai Nüa language as a variety of Southwestern Thai languages spoken in the Southwestern prefectures of Yunnan that directly borders the northwestern Myanmar, such as Da Hong, Baoshan, Linchang, and Pu'er. The speakers refer to themselves and their speech by varieties of names such as Tai Nüa, Tai Le, both of which means the Thai in the north, Tai Tao, which means the Thai in the south, or simply Thai plus a place name such as Tai Mao, which means the Thai from the Mao River. Uh, of course, there are varieties of modern Thai dialects whose lexical data are available. For example, Luo Makshu, 1999, uh, Harris, 1975, three dialects such as Nam Kam, Zefang, and Vang Gungdong. There's also Getni, 1976, Meng Vo dialects, and also Shantanarod, 2007. She collected many dialects. And most recently, Wharton, 2017, he collected data in Mương Sing in Laos. For the sorry. For the current progress in the phonological history of Tai Nüa, our most recent published paper represents the most detailed understanding of the chronology of sound changes of Tai Nüa based on the investigation of the manuscript in the late 16th century. However, there are still many available manuscripts that are left to be further investigated. For example, the 17th century Baiyi Guan Yi and the 18th century Meng Mao Yi, for example. It is thus precisely our belief that further investigation of these manuscripts will reveal a more precise and absolute dating of the phonological innovations in Tai Nüa. Thus, it is our attention today to present some preliminary result from our current investigation of the 17th century Sino by manual of translation. Our claim are as follows. First of all, our data suggests that the changes in 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, which you can all read, were completed prior to the 17th century. At the same time, the changes in 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3 were also in progress, but yet to be completed until like much later century probably. But however, there were no trace of the change of the aspect that stops ch and p to s and f as we can observe in modern dialect. So these two changes probably postdated the 17th century. For a short recap of our most recent paper, we found that the following pairs of contrasts, the one in the red box over there, those contrasts were still found in the late 16th century based on our investigation of that manuscript, which means that the loss of these contrasts must have taken place sometime between that manuscript, the late 16th century, and the modern era, right? So the phonological sketch of Tai Nüa in the 16th century, as can be drawn from that manuscript, shows that there still exists a couple of aspirated stop phonemes, the p, the ch, and the k, in contrast to their fricative counterparts, as well as the alveolar and palatal-nasal, the n and the ñ, which are lost in modern dialects, and as well as the trill sound, the r, right, which all became h in all modern dialects. Moreover, the contrast between the low and the mid, front and back vowels in open syllable can still be found in manuscript. That led to our proposal that, oops, sorry, that led to our proposal that the changes on the left box, the one on the left box, predated the late 16th century, whereas the changes in the right box, the one over there, post-dated the late 16th century as they were not attested in the manuscript. Oops. But in the light of new evidence, precisely another manuscript from a later century, does our proposal still hold? We would argue that pretty much so. So the next manuscript that we are currently investigating was originally preserved at the Awanokudi Bunko Library. However, due to fire incident, probably World War II, only the photograph copy remains available at Toyo Bunko Library in Kyoto University. And although we don't know its precise date, it is estimated to be from around 17th century, and this on the inside. Unlike the previous manuscript from the late 16th century, this 17th century manuscript does not contain any native script. So there was no Tai Nüa script written in the manuscript at all. Only the phonetic transcription of the target language, which in this case is Tai Nüa, is provided for each Chinese entry. So the Chinese entries are actually the one above, the line above, right? You can see words like 天,天上,天下, the sky, up on the sky, below the sky, right? The Chinese line you see below is the phonetics transcription of the tiny vocab to be read in that period. For example, the word for sky, 天, they transcribe how Chinese say that word as with the character fa. And for the word cloud, again, over there, they use the character mo to transcribe how China would say such word cloud. Okay. The way we investigate the manuscript is simply comparing the Chinese transcription with both the reconstructed Proto-Saracen forms as well as the modern China. As can be seen, the change in the Chinese transcription clearly points to phonological change that took place in Tanya. For example, we have this for reconstructed forms, right? The 16th century manuscripts show these transcription for these words. The current manuscripts show different transcriptions, which could not have pointed to anything else but change, right? So a phonological sketch of the Tai Nüa in the 17th century can be drawn from these manuscripts, and it confirms the existence of all the aspirated stops here, but not the palatal nasal or the alveolar trill. So there's no trace of these two sounds that were present in the 16th century. And at the same time, the contrast between the low, mid, front, and back vowels in open syllables, the A and the O no longer exists, as reflected from the transcription of these two vowels. In the next few slides, I will show some examples that illustrate what I just said. First of all, the manuscript suggests that denasalization of palatal nasal took place and completed after the late 16th century, but certainly before the 17th century. Since in the late 16th century manuscript, the transcription was done by the Mandarin alveolar nasal sound, no? Whereas in the late 17th century, it was done by the palatal glide, which corresponds to like modern Dania forms, right? Oops. Similarly, the manuscript suggests that the aspiration of the true phonemes, the R, was completed after the late 16th century, but certainly before the 17th century. Since the late 16th century manuscript, the transcription was done by the Mandarin liquid sounds, right? The little part. Whereas in the 17th century, it was done by the velar fricative, much like the items with initial glottal fricative. Also, the raising of the low back vowels all to mid back vowel o in open syllable can be confirmed by the change in the transcription of the word head, which became identical to the transcription of the word tower only in the 17th century, akin to their homophony in modern Tai Nüa forms. And likewise, the raising of the low non-front vowel to mid-front vowel a in open syllables can be confirmed by the change in transcription of the word female slash wife, which became identical to the transcription of the word mother in the 17th century. Uh, much like the modern tiny forms, which differ only in tones, right? Because they came back, they went all the way back to different tonal categories, A versus B. There are also signs of ongoing change. For example, the beginning of the change from an N to an L that we can observe in Central core kind of dialects. For example, in the numeral ones, whereas all other items faithfully has an N transcription, the numeral one somehow has an L transcription ever since the 16th century, and it remains pretty much so. But other items were not affected, and this is modern. This is the standard tiny f, which we can see that the N already became L. So this change probably already begun since 16th century, but took much longer time to complete. In addition, the unrounding of the labiovelar initial can be glimpsed from the transcription of the word buffalo without the labiovelar guide, whereas the rest of the lexicon still shows transcription with such guide, unlike the modern form, which completely dropped the guide, right? As we see. Yeah. Lastly, the beginning of the change from a h, a fricative one, to a k, stop one, as can be observed in non-com dialect, can be attested also in the 17th century transcription in a few items, such as words like ginger and teeth, which, as you can see, these supposedly they should have like fricative transcription, but no, in the 17th century, they were transcribed with by characters with initial aspirated stops, which seems to correspond more with the non-com than the standard tiny dialects. Uh, on the other hand, there's no trace of assimilation of the ch sound into an s sound, as reflected in the transcription of these words. So we have words that were recorded with ch initial transcriptions remains pretty much so. Modern dialect, in contrast, has s undiscriminated from words with faithful initial s. And likewise, also no trace of change from a p sound to an f sound, as reflected in the transcription of these words. Word for bees and word for spicy remains pretty much so. These are also a change observable in non-com. So for our conclusion, the evidence from this 17th century warrants completion of the three following changes prior to the 17th century, namely the raising of low non-central vowels in open syllable to corresponding mid vowels. So it's a low and mid merger, and all becomes A and O in open syllables. Two other changes are the denasalization of palatonasal ny to y, and aspiration of trill from an R to an H. Uh, In addition, evidence suggests the ongoing stage of following changes: denasalization of alveolar nasal and then to now delabelization of labialvelus, quote to quote, pulsivization of velar as we found in non-com. However, there's no sign of following changes. These two changes being ch and p becoming s and f, suggesting that they must postdate the 17th century. Most certainly, our current finding improves our understanding of the chronology of changes. For now, we can distinguish post 16th century changes even further into pre 17th century and post 17th century changes, right? So we can split our earlier result into these two blocks, more discrete. So if we look back at the internal classification of Tai Nüa dialects as we tentatively propose, our current findings strongly suggest adjustment to these schemes, particularly the chronological places of these changes as we highlighted. Precisely, the current findings distinguish these changes into three groups, namely the completed ones in the red, right? The ongoing ones in green, and lastly, the yet to occur ones in blue, the one that post-date 17th century. And accordingly, thus, we need to make final distinction of the chronological periods where changes took places. So originally, we only have things like pre-16, post-16s. Now we have like a couple of layers with precise changes to be allowed in these slots. However, when viewed from a broader perspective of Southwestern Thai branch, all the changes within Tai Nüa that we just chronologized turn out to be a shared innovation with other neighboring Thai languages around the geographical area of northern mainland Southeast Asia, and the most widespread changes being the change in RTNH and also Chatusa, which can be found all the way to northern Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, whereas the second most widespread change, namely the monophthongization of the original diphthongs to mid vowels, these ones, seem to cluster only among the southwestern Yunnan and northeastern Myanmar border. All the other changes seem to be much more limited in certain areas. Only, for example, the change from fur to a pur around here, or a change from word to a ver in this area. This, I think, supports the wave model of how innovations spread among closely related languages that are still geographically close and are in continual contact with each other throughout the millennium. Uh, this is precisely a dialect continuum as what we see in Southwestern Thai, with the core area being the part where Yunnan meets Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. So this is precisely the core area. And as you can see, Siamese or Thai are actually the language in the periphery of the Thai world, right? One of the southernmost dialects. And oh, sorry. Oh, and we of course have plans for further investigations, such as the 18th century Baiyi manuscript, or the tonal correspondence in all three manuscripts, namely the late 16th century manuscript that we studied 2 years ago, the current one, the 17th century, as we discussed today, and this 18th century Baiyi. And lastly, also the Baiyi part in the 1407 scroll that was presented to the Ming Emperor by the Tibetan high priest, as mentioned in Daniel 2012. And that's the end of our talk. Thank you for your attention. And I would like to also make acknowledgement for Mr. Todd Chandler, our undergraduate research assistant who helps us collect the data. And also thanks to the Department of Linguistics at the Ohio State University for the traveling fund. Thank you.